Hey guys, welcome to Predictapalooza Phase 2, the 21-inch sets. Also welcome to the sauna because we are in the midst of a heat wave in May and we have no air conditioning because they broke it when they installed their new furnace in January. Hopefully that will get remedied soon. Meanwhile, let's start taking a look at these. So when I started this Predictapalooza series, I had envisioned there being two phases. The first being a bunch of 17-inch sets, which I've done, and then some 21-inch sets. Both of these belong to customers. We have a classic mahogany holiday set and a classic mahogany pedestal set. And I'm also going to throw one of my sets into the mix, which is a blonde tandem set. That is the set that has a 25-foot long cable and handle on top of the CRT, so you can move it around. What I want to do in this installment is talk about some of the technical challenges that are going to be involved. 21-inch sets are a different beast than the 17s. The main difference being they do not have a power transformer. They are series strung, which presents a series of challenges, like there's a big filament dropper resistor in there that's often bad, there's a thermistor that's often bad. The chassis is quite different in that there are a lot of components more traditionally laid out on terminal strips and point-to-point wiring. It still does have a main circuit board with the wire wrap terminals on it, but there's a lot more going on in the chassis than in the 17-inch sets. They are prone to having bad or weak picture tubes, which I believe is what happened with this guy. They also low voltage picture tubes, 2.35 volts. This was Philco's big thing back in '58 when he announced it, is they put a lot of engineering research into making an SF picture tube. Short factor, I believe is what the SF stands for. So rather than giving it a normal picture tube designator like 21FDP4, it was called an SF21 for short factor 21-inch. Unfortunately, they also had a short life, and a lot of them had to be replaced, I believe under warranty in most cases. But what would also happen is when people were going to check these, if they weren't aware of their special filament voltage, they would test it at 6.3 volts and blow out the filament. They are also really hard to come by, replacements that is, because, well, these are very collectible, and since the original picture tubes are known for being bad or having a short life, the replacements got gobbled up over the years, and yeah, good luck finding one. I don't have any tips for you. If I could, I would get some for myself. The only reason I've got a replacement for this one, which we'll take a look at shortly, is one of my viewers hooked me up. It does have some minor condition issues, but it does test good. I think we can proceed with this set. This set we need to take a closer look at. Cosmetically, they're both in excellent condition. They do have faux mahogany grain finishes, which can often be flaking off or in bad shape, but these are in good condition. And the screen covers, especially this one, no stink, no film on it, no crud. So that's another big plus. So we know we have a bad picture tube on this guy, and we'll see about this. Now the third one, my set, I did show it years ago. It's, the insides are in remarkable condition, the finest I've ever seen. It came from the Southwest, either Texas or Arizona, something like that, as best I can recall, which did a great job of preserving the chassis. The original cadmium plating's in great shape, no corrosion, and it works on all the original parts fairly well. Cabinet-wise, the Tandem has a base unit and a little wooden cabinet. I'd show it to you, but it's still in my storage unit. I will be getting it shortly. The bottom couple inches may have been in water or something like that. The finish flaked off. And, well, that can be challenging to reproduce. It's that classic 50s Haywood Wakefield blonde lined oak kind of finish. That'll require some experimenting. Now, when I bought it, it just came with the base unit. The head unit was not present. I believe through a little detective work, I found it listed on eBay as a complete set, and I think somebody tried to ship it and the CRT unit was destroyed. That's what happens. That's why you shouldn't ship these. Unless you really pack it well, maybe even disassemble it partially and remove the head unit. Anyway, since then I've found bits and pieces. I also have a mahogany set which I restored electrically, but it also has issues with the head unit. I've had 3 tandems over the years. One of them I was able to make one good unit, and I completed that series some years ago in the old apartment. I sold that set. What remains are, I have 2 good base units, one restored, one about to be restored. As far as the head units go, I've got a mess. I have an assemblage of cables that have been cut, damaged plugs, damaged bases. I'm hoping that I can cobble together, at least for now, 1 and eventually 2 working CRT head units with good cables and good connectors. That's a challenge. That's why you don't see a whole lot of tandem sets around that work. 1, they didn't make that many, and 2, they are rather challenging to get working. So that's what we're going to be doing. Let's start out by, I'll give you a little visual tour of these 2, and then let's take a look at that replacement picture tube. Here's the Holiday. I believe this came from Minnesota. It has a little bit of funk on the screen cover, but very easily wipes off. There's a little bit on the other side. That's a little bit more challenging. You have to take the thing apart to clean the inside. Kind of annoying, but that's what you got to do. Now here is that faux finish, which is maybe the nicest I've ever seen. So all this is like sort of printed on, and it flakes off really easily. This is real wood. That is fake. That is real wood. This is a perforated metal grill painted with wood grain to make it look like mahogany. And hey, this has the UHF option. Now, if you recall, I started working on a Holiday at the start of the pandemic that came out of a basement, and it was just horrifically moldy and nasty and rusty and falling apart. So much so that I did not use the chassis that it came with, but I had a spare one that had the UHF options, and that cabinet didn't have UHF. So what I plan on doing is using this as a model so I know where to drill the hole and turning mine into a UHF and kind of give it a bit of an upgrade. The antenna is broken off, but if you've been watching my videos, you know that we may have a solution to that, because he has the base, which is the important bit. This can be replaced. Has the back chains broken off, which is a very common issue. The way they originally made these was it was a little bit of a chain here, so when you took the back off, it was still attached to the cabinet. You could kind of flip it up out of the way. Kind of a silly idea. Still kind of gets in the way, so they're almost always cut off. But at least he's got it. And the power cord may still be salvageable. And he has all the knobs. So that's what I meant by good cosmetic condition. A little bit of scuffing here and there. That's incredibly common, not a big deal. Now notice the legs. Well, the lack of legs. There should be legs on this. That's why I have a book kind of propping it up, and it's still not quite level. He says he has a stand for it. And I've been seeing that more and more lately. I believe either Philco made it or it was aftermarket, but it attaches where the original feet would be. And it gets it up and kind of turns it into a console set, which is kind of a neat thing. And that may be how the set always was. Well, normally when the legs are on there and have been on there for decades, it leaves a pretty noticeable signature of where it was. This has a little bit of it on this side, not really on the other. And that it doesn't have quite the right outline the legs would. So I think maybe this was always on that stand. Anyways, picture tube is shot. So right now I'm up in what was my backup workshop slash guest bedroom. It's still unoccupied, so I figured while these are up here, I might as well do some surgery and take this head off and check out the picture tube more closely while I've got room up here to work. I've often stated that everything back then was fastened by a 1/4-inch nut. Except when they're not. In this case, they are Phillips screws. Sort of brass. It's turned dark over the years. Every screw is present. That is a rare thing. Even the back is a faux wood grain finish. It's really just masonite. And power cord is built into the back. Pop rivets on there. So if the cord was damaged, I would need to get those rivets out and ideally find a new cord that would match the mounting, and I could put some new rivets on there, or screws and nuts, or worst case, modify that opening and just use a cheater cord and just plug it straight in and not have it attached to the back at all. The idea being you're not supposed to be able to turn the set on when the back is off. That's why they do this safety interlock. Alrighty. This is my favorite part. Let's see what we've got. Right away, I like what I'm seeing for a few reasons. One, it's shiny. It's not a rust bucket. In fact, it's really clean. Just some dust. Looks like the circuit board is at least partially, if not completely, all original. Also fantastic. And I can see the wiring harness is intact, which I don't think I've ever seen before on one of these models. Which means there's a good chance this chassis has never been pulled. Wow. Alright. Well, some of the wires on this side aren't quite hooked up how they should be, so maybe that's not quite true, but regardless, it looks really clean. And I was talking about antennas of the 17s and how they are always sticking out of the sets because they don't fully retract. These can. So there's the bottom of the antenna. You could push it in all the way and it would fill this void here, I believe. And yeah, you can see it's just completely gone. Anyways, and there's the UHF tuner, that little copper box down there. Now, unlike the 17s that has a separate knob for tuning and like coarse tuning and fine tuning for UHF, this just has one big knob with a gear reduction mechanism inside. Sort of. It's kind of weird. At least every one I've seen, it'll start going slowly, and then when you get to a certain point, then it kind of, the course kicks in. It's a rather complicated mechanism inside. But anyways. So yeah, let's start taking this apart. They do give you two very handy indicators of where to start. Yes, we need to take that off. These are 1/4-inch nuts, so you gotta take these two out, take the knobs off, then this chassis will slide out. I want to get to the point where we can start disconnecting things because I need to disconnect that CRT harness. Oh, and by the way, the arms on this are phenomenal. Perhaps the nicest I've ever seen. This is what they look like when they're in good condition. It looks like brass plating. Crazy Midwest springs. It just went from 85 to 65 degrees in like half an hour, and now we have a thunderstorm, so sweet relief. Anyway, I just pulled out the chassis, so after removing all the knobs, removing those two screws in the back that the arrows were pointing to, Just a little bit of wiggling and the whole thing pulled out. And as is always the case, that cable clamp that was up here I commented on, it immediately shattered. That's just the way it goes with this type of plastic they use, and that explains why I've never seen one before, because they just don't last. But we'll be replacing that, not a big deal. Also found the remains of the antenna. So that would have gone in here, so when the antenna was pushed all the way into the set, it would have been inside of this plastic tube. That's curious. What is that? Huh. I don't think I've seen that before. There is a wire going, it looks like it goes up to one of the screws holding in the CRT base, and then it's attached to this piece of metal that would eventually go to the chassis. So there must be some way of grounding everything. Sort of. I mean, it's a hot chassis set. So throughout this, there are plastic insulators. So this can be hot, but this is not. It floats. There are no physical electrical connections between the two. So what all that is going to, I'd have to kind of trace it out and think about it. So let's see, this mounts to this. So this has got to be floating. That does not go to either side. I presume it's there to bleed off any static charge that may build up on the arms or the base, so you don't get a little shock when you touch it. 'Cause that's what happens with these sets. There can happen with these sets. I'm sure you've like run your knuckles over the front of a set and you felt kind of the hairs stand up. That's because the plastic builds up static charge from the high voltage action going on in there, and this is a way to kind of complete the circuit so it can kind of bleed off somewhere. I should also correct myself. There is an electrical path between the hot chassis and this. Somewhere underneath there would be a 470K resistor. That's really standard back then. Tell me there was a 0.05 microfarad cap and a 470K resistor in parallel connecting the hot to the floating parts for exactly that reason, to bleed off charge that built up. Anyways, enough for that little lesson on hot chassis. Let's look at what we have. So I noticed a few things right away. One, it must have seen some servicing because a lot of the tubes are not Philco. The fusible resistor has been replaced with something I've never really seen before that's deteriorated. But other than that, it is in really, really good shape. And that cap, which is a kind of a high failure rate part, has been replaced. Kind of funky the way they did it. It's interesting. They left the original there and just cut off one end of it. And so both of these ends are connected together, and this end is connected to the stump of the original. I wonder why they left it there, other than kind of a neat historical reminder of what was once there. I don't know. But the rest of it appears to be all original. And boy, we got some serious dust bunnies. Interesting dust color too, because it's kind of yellowy. But underneath that, it looks great. These are always kind of crummy looking. The cadmium plating they used over pot metal or whatever, it never looks all that great. It's just some really cheap plating they did. So as far as that goes, that's about as good as I've ever seen. And I don't know that I've ever seen this label before. I'm kind of curious now, maybe this is an earlier or a later production than all the ones I've worked on before. Because I've never noticed that wire up front before. I don't think I've ever seen that label before. And it looks like it was kind of added on. I've seen this one before, and this label's on top of that one, so maybe it was a later addition. What it is it's instructions on how to remove the chassis and put it back in. You can see, kind of see it was a perforated tear-off strip thing. Because here's the beginnings. It's repeating over again. There's a little perforation line there. I know it's a ridiculous little minor detail. This kind of stuff interests me when I work on the same chassis over and over and over again, is to see the differences between them. And you can see how they maybe modified their production processes. Issues came up. There's a better look at the UHF tuner. It's that copper box, and that B, I believe, a 6AF4. Maybe it's a 3. No, it's a 2AF4. All the UHF tuners use the AF4 tube. There was a 2-volt version, a 3-volt version, a 4, probably a 5, for sure a 6. Who knows what else? Trying to get some sense of how many tubes might still be the original. So that's a Philco. Wow, is that an Arcturus? That's a Philco. That's Philco. That's Philco. That might be it. I'll have to look at those later. Now let's check this out. Yeah, wow, it's an Arcturus. That was a company known back in the late 20s for making blue glass globe tubes, and they were absorbed, I think, by RCA. Replaced with genuine Arcturus tubes only. I mean, I'm pretty sure by the late 50s, Arcturus hadn't been its own company for 20 years, maybe 30 years. So it's really curious, and I haven't seen that logo before. Like, did somebody buy the rights to the brand name and revive it? Or did whoever owned the brand decide to kind of resurrect it as like a premium thing or something? The pins kind of look like they might be gold-plated. Require a little research. There's a giveaway in a lot of these tubes. Notice the 9BR7 is printed on with a different type of ink, different color, different font. That's was done by whoever made this tube. Tung Sol, Sylvania. There weren't that many companies that made tubes. And then Arcturus would have been something that was printed on afterwards. Just a little bit of history for you. There are probably maybe less than 10 companies that actually had factories that made tubes. The dozens and dozens of brands you see, they're just rebranded by the manufacturer. Alright, let us tip this up and take a look underneath. But I really like what I see on the top so far. Oh, one more thing before I flip it over. That is a really, really nice looking flyback. Barely any cracks in the wax. Super clean inside that high voltage box. Very nice. At least one nice thing about working on these is between the high voltage box and the tuner, you can flip the chassis over and it's firmly supported. You can work away without worrying about damaging anything by putting pressure on it. So here's what I meant by there being a bunch of stuff with point-to-point wiring and terminal strips underneath the chassis, which we didn't have anything like this with the 17-inch sets. Let's see, as my memory serves, and that is a filter choke for the power supply, vertical output transformer, audio output transformer. Oh, one cap has been replaced. The rest looks original. There's a filament dropper I talked about, mentioned earlier. Usually they're in miserable condition. That one actually looks like it might still be functional. And there is the thermistor. Ooh, what happened with that? Terminal strip broke. But that is still there. That is the original. Often what happens is over time these deteriorate and the disc just falls out, which will immediately stop the set from working. But hey, look how clean this thing is. I mean, man, looks like the capacitor was made yesterday. Whew. I mean, all the metal, the plating and everything, this thing looks super minty.
This might actually be nicer than the blend tandem I was just coming on about. All right. So the only issue we have with this set is the dead picture tube. So I'm trying to remember. Well, I'll have to open it up again and take a look. I can't remember what was dead about it. I can't remember if it lost its vacuum, had an open filament, no emissions. Because if it does still have vacuum and it's an open filament, there is a very remote possibility we can re-weld that filament. So it's a tricky thing in any circumstances, but with these really tiny necks, the neck is really small in diameter and it's rather short. It's not much to work with. In the past, I've re-welded open filaments or open cathodes on CRTs that had a much larger, longer neck. So, because what you have to do is you apply voltage to, say, the filament and whack it. Or with my new Midwest cathode beamer, I have the vibrator accessory. You attach a power supply to the filament, and then you put the vibrator against the neck with the hope that with that shaking, the two loose ends will touch and weld themselves back together. It's a really long shot, but considering how hard these picture tubes are to find, maybe. I just verify with my trusty multimeter that indeed we do have an open filament. So I'm going to go ahead and take this all apart and remove the picture tube. And I can examine it once I get this yoke off, see if the getter is still good, which means it still has vacuum, and then maybe we can try to re-weld the open filament. Even if I'm successful, I'm still intend to swap it out because I don't want to give this set back to the customer with a re-welded filament, because those can very easily fail again, especially during the long journey back up to Minnesota with all the vibration. I don't want to take that kind of risk. So, if it can if I can squeeze a little more life out of it, great. I'll use it in one of my sets with the knowledge that it's on borrowed time. All right. So I do still have some 17-inch sets to finish off. The other reason I'm doing this, aside from just the interest of it, is I need to order parts, and I want to see what I'm dealing with, so I know what exactly I need to order. So I will be ordering up some replacement thermistors, some power resistors to replace this guy, and of course the usual electrolytics and film caps to replace these guys. That one in particular, it goes across the line, so that should be a Type X safety cap, not just a plain old film capacitor, and so on and so forth. All right. I guess we got to take a look at this one. I think I'll save that for tomorrow, though. It's getting late, and I've done one of these before. I know these backs can be a pain to get off. Even when you take the screws off, they can get kind of hung up on things and not want to come off. Oh man, poor little Choopy. He hates noise. There's a thunderstorm going on right now. And usually it's a little bit more calm in the basement, but the storm's been pretty bad, so it's just not, he's not too happy about it. Now let's take a look at the pedestal. And actually it was rather easy to get apart once I remembered that the AC interlock for the power cord is located down here. After I removed the screws from the back, it wasn't coming off until I remembered that I need to kind of pull and manipulate it down here until that interlock comes free, and then kind of rotate it a little bit and pull it off this way. And that's what the back looks like. So it's a mix of real wood. It's probably poplar that's painted mahogany, and then some type of thin, maybe it's masonite. Oh, it kind of feels like it might be some type of plywood or something. And then it has a faux wood grain finish on the outside. Anyway, let's take a look at the electronics, which are just as clean, if not cleaner, than the holiday set. So, again, fantastic. I suspect having the chassis vertically mounted helps out a bit, because the dust is going to kind of settle down. Plus, it is enclosed, and there are no holes up on top for ventilation, so no dust can get down in there. So the ventilation holes are on the back up in this area. And I also went back through my correspondence with the owner of this set, and he did power it up before he contacted me, and he got a horizontal line on the screen, which is typical. It means the vertical is not functioning properly, which is a really common issue, but it also means that the picture tube is good, the flyback is good, and so on. And again, some of the parts that are typically very deteriorated, like this filament dropper, it's in fine condition. So as you can see, it is the same chassis. It's just oriented differently. So it's vertical instead of horizontal. And then all the other stuff, like the tuner, would normally be mounted here. And you can see it's the same chassis and it has all the mounting holes. But they instead have the tuner mounted up top on a separate piece of metal. And same with the control cluster here. So, same stuff, just repackaged, rearranged, which is actually typical of all the Predictas. For example, this IF permastrip, I believe, existed for 1 or 2 years prior to the Predicta coming out, and maybe some of the other parts. In other words, they were used in conventional console TVs prior to the Predicta. And then they just repackaged things, rejiggered them so they'd fit into unusual cabinets. So I'd noted this earlier about the input connections looking a little funky. So I guess this thing had an internal antenna of sorts, but rather than a telescoping antenna, the internal antenna just is a dipole made of 2 scraps of single conductive wire, and that's what these 2 go to. So they shouldn't be connected if you're going to feed an external signal in. That would go to these screw terminals, and that feeds into the tuner. So we could probably just pull these out of the way, maybe cap them off so they don't short into anything, but there's no reason to have those even sticking out and add to confusion since we're not going to be receiving anything over the air. I believe that is the original fusible resistor. Kind of a pull handle on it. I don't believe this set has been worked on at all. And it looks like it might be all original tubes as well. Every one that I can see here has the yellow Philco printing on it, including the damper tube. Only one I can't see too well is the horizontal output. But yeah, I believe that's a Philco too. So this set might be 100% original, which is a pretty remarkable thing. Well, no repairs. Cool. Cool. I don't know what it is. Both these sets came from Minnesota. Both the set's owners had the same first name, different last names. Just coincidence again, but man, look how nice that brass is. Cold, dry air, maybe. And the screen cover. I mean, man, I wish mine looked that good. Not only does it not have the foggy haze or really any odor, it hasn't shrunk. Or at least not much. When they do start shrinking. I mean, forget about the odor and all that. These things shrink with age and they start pulling away more and more. And you start getting a bigger and bigger gap on sides. Just more of the joys of ownership of a 21-inch Predicta. Alrighty. Cool. So I want to take the back off of the CRT housing on this and double check the picture tube. I mean, yeah, I know the owner powered it up and got a line, but let's see. One, is it the original 2.35 volt or is it a replacement 6.3 volt CRT? And let's see how much life it has. And two, let's start taking this puppy apart. Kind of mixed news when it comes to the picture tube and the pedestal set. I could not find a label on the picture tube when I looked inside the cover. However, I wired it up as the original picture tube would be, and I'm running it at 2.34 volts. And I checked the filament draw, and it's drawing 600 milliamps, which is what the original would draw. So I'm going to assume this is, in fact, a 21 EAP4. Well, the problem is, well, we don't have an HK short, that's a good thing, but we do have a G1 short. What does that mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that there's two pieces of metal making direct contact. It could be a high resistance path between the grid and one of the other elements. How can that happen? Well, a bit of the cathode coating falling off and making contact is a pretty common way for that to happen. So the resistance between the two might be 10 mega ohms, 5 mega ohms. It should be infinite. It's frustrating because it has a good cutoff. Cutoff is basically the ability to modulate the electron beam, which corresponds to having good contrast. And we have great emissions and a pretty good life test. I have tried the remove G1 short function. I did get a flash in the neck, but it didn't remove the short. They say you can try it up to 3 times if necessary. I don't want to push my luck. I would rather see what kind of image can this produce before I keep hitting that red button again and again, because I don't want to damage it. So we will just proceed and hope for the best. If we have to, after this is restored and we have a blurry picture or washed out picture, an unwatchable picture, then we can come back to this and maybe try to be a little more aggressive with it. I unmounted the Holiday CRT head and just removed the cover, and boy, did it need to be removed because there is a lot of decomposed tennite on the inside that needs to get cleaned off. Now let's take a look at the CRT. And there it is. Boy, it's a shame. It looks so pretty. Everything looks brand new. It's crazy. And it was the original Philco low voltage SF21 type picture tube. Wow, it's so incredibly pristine. Okay. Interesting, I never noticed that before. They have all separate wiring channels. This is the video signal. They always try to route that separately from the yoke signals to keep interference to a minimum. Okay, so we got to take the sucker all apart, which is not trivial to do. The picture tube is held into this frame, both with tension around the outside and also these two straps that run across with tension on this. All that needs to get loosened up and the yoke unmounted and the whole thing taken apart. And then I have to do the reverse to get everything back together. I'm going to take a whole bunch of reference photos. In this box, we may have a solution for the Predicta holiday with that picture tube. Contacted by a viewer who said he had a good Predicta CRT he'd been hanging on to for a while and had no use for, so we worked out a deal. He shipped it up to me. Cost a pretty penny to have it shipped, and partly, well, not partly, that's because, well, he double boxed it, and it's a very large box. So let's see if it survived. Now he says it's a 2.35 low voltage filament CRT. Here it is. Let's start with the good news. Yeah, it 2.35 volts or 2.5 volts. Everything's looking good. No HK shorts, no G1 shorts. We've got all sorts of cutoff control on the proper range, and emissions are fantastic. Life test, rock solid. I'm thinking maybe this is a rebuild. There is a bump on the neck, but sometimes that happens during manufacturing. If this was a 21 EAP4, which was originally used in Philco, there would be a big Philco label on it, but it may have fallen off. The aqua DAG coating is deteriorated, so the label may have fallen off. There's no label or indication anywhere whatsoever on this of who made it or what the tube type is. All I can tell you is that if I use the settings for a 21 EAP4, it tests fantastically. So it should just drop right into the set and work. So the bad, the coating needs to get replaced. You'd already tipped me off about that. Not a big deal. There's a product called Slip Plate, which is a spray graphite product. Inexpensive. Just need to mask this off and spray some on. No biggie. The plastic keyway guide that helps the base line up with the pins is pretty badly damaged. Again, not a big deal. It's not like you'd take the plug on and off a whole lot. I could probably make do without just leaving it as is, but I might be able to get a replacement. These usually can be slid off the pins and then pop one off of a dead CRT if I have any. So that's not a big deal. The only real downside to this that I've seen so far is on the face of it, which is pretty dirty. There are some faint scratches in the glass. Something you really don't want to see. Hopefully they won't be visible. The other potential problem with that is it can weaken the glass. If they're really deep scratches, it could be so bad it would implode. With in other words, it weakens the glass. Just like when you cut glass, you score it first, and then it tends to break along that line. However, they're very faint, so I'm not worried about an impending implosion by any means. But it'd be nicer if they weren't there, of course. I've heard it might be possible to buff them out with, I think it's cerium oxide, something like that. It's basically a really, it's a buffing compound that can, get scratches out of glass. I've never tried it. I'm not going to worry about that until we know that you can actually see them when there's a raster on the screen. So I'll disconnect this and I'll flip it over and you can see what I'm talking about. That's better. It does appear that the damage is pretty well localized to this area. Now I'm going at an angle so it's exaggerating it when you look straight on, when it's backlit. I know when the phosphorus is glowing it may not be visible. I don't know. Won't know until I get this in a working set. So, fingers crossed. And finally, we have my blonde tandem base. We'll worry about the CRT unit later. For now, let's get it working electrically. Blonde finish is rarer, but it is a photo finish faux finish, just like these mahogany sets. I think you can get a better sense of that if I get a little bit closer here. See, it's chipped off in some spots, and there's some weird crazing in areas. I would like to kind of spruce this up and clear coat it, but I'm a little wary because I'm not sure what would be safe to use. You can see it's already got crazing in some spots. I could make it a whole lot worse depending on what I would spray on. Usually I use lacquer, but lacquer has pretty aggressive solvent as acetone, which could adversely affect this. So yeah, maybe I'll just clean it and wax it and let it show its age. So, for those of you who don't know, this contains that chassis with a slight modification. On the back, they install a plug. As you can see here, there's a big plug that goes on that, which has a very long, thick cable that runs to the picture tube. This has the high voltage, the deflection signals to the yoke, the video signal, and even the sound, and also an AC interlock. So this will not even turn on without that being plugged in. There's an interlock in the CRT, so the AC comes in through that line cord, goes up to the power switch, goes through this plug all the way to the CRT down 25 feet back into another plug, and then completes the circuit. So you actually do get a few volts drop across all that copper. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. These are a 9L37 chassis. This is a 9L38. It does use a different type of flyback, and there is an additional video amp inside of the CRT housing to compensate for losses in that long cable. Otherwise, they're basically the same. I'll take the back off and give you a little peek. Hey, what do you know? The chain is actually intact on this back. Now, looking at the back, I wanted to point out to something that's fresh in my memory before I forget about it. Power consumption. I believe it says 180 watts. A question I commonly get asked is, if I'm replacing a selenium rectifier or silicon rectifier in the B+ circuit, what should I use? Well, that answer really should be based on how much current is it going to draw, because you want to get a rectifier that can handle that amount of current. Often they don't tell you what the B+ current is. Well, how can you estimate it? Well, if we know the set is drawing 180 watts, we know it runs on, let's say, 120 volts, we know how much current it draws. It's a bit over an amp. We also know it's a series strung set, and we know that that series string is 0.6 amps. So you take your 0.6 amps times 120 volts, let's say, and you figure out how many watts that is, subtract it from that, divide that by 120 volts. That's how much current is going to go through your B+ circuit, roughly speaking. I would double that or more and use that for your current rating for your rectifiers. Let's see if we can get this interlock unlocked. There we go. Now there is one issue I'd forgotten about with this set. This center bit broke off. There's a price to pay for the coolness factor. The more complicated, unusual, out there a set is, the more weird stuff there is to go wrong. And often these have issues. So there's part of it that chipped off there. The center part where the high voltage connects is broken loose. Sometimes the plugs have issues where they have chips or some of the pins are broken or bent. So I think somebody had tried to glue this before. And who knows what they use. Super glue, 2-part epoxy, I don't know. I will attempt to glue it again. Maybe they didn't, because it does fit in there very snugly. But it is kind of discolored, so I'm not sure. But hey, I would like to try using that acrylic cement I have as it seems to do a fantastic job on a lot of types of plastic. Like it works great on acrylic and polycarbonate, so it's worth a try. I did scavenge one of these from another chassis, so I can replace that if I have to. They didn't make many of these sets to begin with, so you can imagine spare parts are a little tricky to come by. So I try to salvage what I can. Anyways, here is a peek at the chassis. So just as the others, all three of these are in remarkable condition. If you pick up one of these sets, don't expect it to look like this. This is not normal. And no corrosion. Typically there is corrosion and maybe a mouse lived in there and there can, a variety of condition issues. But this, so all three of these are essentially all original and all in fantastic cosmetic condition. So what a treat to work on these all at the same time. We will not be getting out the evapor rust. I think this is a good place to break off the video. I have the information I wanted, which is to know, are these sets restorable? What condition are they in? And what do I need to order to make the restorations happen? It's also pretty neat, I think, to see the three main 21-inch models that use the series strung chassis all in a room together at once. So you can see how by just reconfiguring the chassis and repackaging it, they made three very distinct models, basically all the same electrically. We have the Pedestal, also known as the barber pole, where it's mounted vertically with a swivel CRT on top and a nifty cabinet. The Holiday, where it's horizontal with the picture tube right on top with the swivel. And then the Tandem, where it's also horizontal and a little table-like cabinet with a 25-foot long cable so you can put the picture tube in various places around the room to suit your needs. Now there are two other 21-inch Predictas. One is the Continental, which seems to be the most desirable and collectible and fairly rare. It's similar to this but uses the power transformer based chassis more commonly seen in the 17-inch sets. But there's also a tandem stereophonic set. I only saw one briefly once. That may be the rarest of the Predictas. It's this with some extra controls, one's for tone, and I think it had a jack so you could have an external secondary speaker, thus the name stereophonic. And maybe it had an auxiliary audio input. I only got to see it for a few minutes, so I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but I think it was meant to integrate more into your home hi-fi system. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this look, a little preview of what's to come. Right now I need to put together my parts order and get back to finishing off some 17-inch sets because the owners are going to be coming over soon to pick up their sets.